My name's Collin Hart, and I'm here with one of our advisors, Jacqui Pascual, and today we're going to talk about a prior transaction. So Jacqui, thanks for being here today.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So I know that you were involved in the closing of the transaction, but before we get into it, there's a big history associated with this deal. So I'll just kind of bring you up to speed on it. But essentially, we approached this physician in East Texas maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And so as you know, our traditional business model is to help physicians through a sale and leaseback transaction, right?
Right.
And so that's typically, in our experience, the best way to maximize value on the sale of a medical building or a surgery center. So this is a surgery center. It's operated as an ophthalmic surgery center. So they do cataract surgeries and they do LASIK here. And when we approached the practice, the individual partner was really bullish on the long-term trajectory of the practice. There were multiple providers that were operating there. The practice was booming. They really had no competition in the market. And so he said, you know what? I love being a landlord. I don't ever want to sell. Our practice is going to continue forever. And we understood that, right? We're not pushy in our sales process or in our advisory. But we said, look, there's some things that you should consider as you kind of progress in your career, and eventually a real estate sale might make sense for you. And he said, okay, great, I'll let you know when I'm ready. So fast forward to today, 5 years later, and the tides have changed a little bit. He's lost all of his partners. There's no other providers that work there except for him. Unfortunately, he was in a bad accident, and so he really can't practice too actively. I think he sees patients, 1 or 2 days a week. Maybe he does cases from time to time. But the reality is now the investment thesis that he had in terms of holding the building long term really has changed. There's no opportunity to do a sale leaseback because there's really not a thriving practice there anymore. And so now let's talk about your involvement and our engagement with him. And so once we receive the call, can you kind of give us a breakdown of what the physician was looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So the physician gave us a call and he was ultimately ready to retire.
Okay.
No longer interested in being responsible for the building or its expenses.
Okay.
So we started having discussions about sales and leases and how that could go on. So what we advised our physician to do was to let us work on the building and lease it out so we could go ahead and create additional value for him, while simultaneously advertising the building for sale also.
And just curious, was the idea for trying to lease it first, was that because he wanted to continue holding the building, or what's the value of putting a new lease in place with a third-party tenant?
Absolutely. So he really did want to sell the building.
Okay.
And what we were going to do is we were going to put the lease in place.
Sure.
And create a cash flowing building for him,
okay,
then sell it.
Okay.
In comparison to a vacant building that would have no cash flow.
Okay, got it. So what I think I hear you saying is that as a vacant building, his property really doesn't carry too much value, but you were looking to engineer additional value by basically converting from just a vacant surgery center into now a leased cash flowing investment. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, great. That seems like a great strategy. Once you put that strategy in front of him and he agreed with it, what was the timing and how was that different than, say, executing a traditional sale leaseback transaction?
Right. So in a traditional sale leaseback, the time length is usually about 4 to 6 months.
From open to close?
Exactly.
Okay.
On a vacant building, it could last anywhere from 12 to 18 months. And in our case, we do have a highly specialized building with an ambulatory surgery center.
Sure.
Ended up taking us about just over 12 months to
Okay.
transact the building from
Okay.
open to close.
Got it. And so I'm assuming the process is a lot different when you're selling a vacant building or first trying to find a tenant for a building and then selling it than it is if we're just marketing a cash flowing building with a successful practice inside. So can you tell us a little bit about the prospecting process and how it worked to find a tenant or a buyer for the building?
Right, absolutely. So we did have to research quite a bit with surgical specialties that are in and around the area of the subject property. And we span out all the way to, I believe, 100-mile radius to the closest major metropolitan area.
Okay, wow. So really a broad reach. And again, it took, 12, 18 months to identify the ultimate buyer of the building, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. So it almost seems like the folks that you approached, it was initially to have them be a potential tenant here, but these are entrepreneurial practices who are looking to expand, and they like the idea of owning their real estate, right?
Exactly,
Got
yes.
it. And so did that change the strategy for the physician who ultimately owned the building? Did he become a landlord of that practice, or did the transaction occur where the new incoming practice just decided to buy the building?
They preferred to buy the building.
Okay. And so it sounds like they preferred to buy the building because they're larger, booming, more expanding practices that said, hey, we like the idea of owning our real estate, which is typically the type of client that we work with, right?
Right.
Yeah. So from that standpoint, even though we started out wanting to lease, or the physician owner wanting to lease to another practice, it sounds like it turned out more that an incoming practice decided to own or buy the building from him, right?
Exactly, yes.
So did that change the strategy for the landlord or physician owner who we were working on behalf of?
Yes, it did a little bit. I mean, he was ready to retire, as
Right.
you mentioned. So if they were to come in and purchase a building, they would take over the whole building.
So it sounds like the strategy turned out a little bit differently than we originally proposed, right? So you're approaching all these different specialty practices in the region, and what was the sentiment? Did you get the vibe that they really were open to leasing the building, or did it seem like they preferred to buy it?
Overall, most of the practices that were interested in the building wanted to buy the building.
Okay.
So the strategy did change a little bit.
Okay. And I guess I'm not surprised by that, right? And all the practices that you were approaching during this marketing and canvassing process, it sounds like they were growing, they're expanding, they're entrepreneurial, whereas our client was really at the end of his career. And so, at some point earlier in his career, he had bought or built his building to control the destiny of his practice. And these other practices that you were approaching, it sounds like they had a similar mindset, right?
Exactly.
So they don't want to lease from another physician. Their objective is, hey, let's own our home, right? Let's own the property in which we operate. And so it sounds like even though our objective was to try and get it leased and then sold to maximize the value for the client, maybe things work out a little bit differently when we get into practical situations talking to different doctors. Is that right?
Exactly, yes.
Interesting. So now from that perspective, I guess what I want to share with you, and as we go through future transactions, is the 5 year ago conversation that we had with the physician when everything was great. That actually probably was the ideal time for him to sell, right? Mm-hmm. If you look back, his practice was booming. The practice would have signed a new long-term lease with a third party, and their sale price on a per square foot basis probably would be in the range of, $400 to $500 a square foot. I mean, it's a super specialized facility, really profitable. In the end, how did the transaction shake out? I mean, what did you guys close for? What was your sale price per square foot?
Yeah, so the sale price per square foot was just about $200 to $250 per square foot,
Got
which
it.
is significantly less than what you
Half?
just exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And so I imagine that's even below his initial construction cost or investment in the building, right?
Exactly, it was.
Yeah. So I think the moral of this story is that it makes sense to execute a transaction when things are going well, not necessarily when you need to. And the reality is that our physician, unfortunately, left money on the table just because he didn't have the amount of time necessary to effectuate, a maximized value transaction. So ultimately, you guys transacted in the low $200 per square foot range, which was significantly below what a sale leaseback value would be, and probably significantly below replacement costs for a specialized building like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a surgery center. So I think the moral of this story is that it makes sense to take action when things are going well and you have no control over, the future. So while our physician made out well in the transaction, he got some money out of the deal and he'll be able to ride off into the sunset. At the end of the day, there was some lost value.
Right.
Okay. Well, Jacqui, congratulations again on the transaction. It sounds like a great outcome for the client based on the overall situation, and look forward to the next deal together.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.